In this lesson, you are going to learn how to factor trinomials. To factor trinomials, you will find the values needed to turn the trinomial into a polynomial with 4 terms. The polynomial can then be factored by grouping. So let's look at our first example. We have 8x squared plus 10x plus 3. To start, we will name our A, B, and C. So A is 8, B is 10, and C is 3. We will take and do the product of our A times our C, and try to find the sum that equals our B value. So let's take a look at that. 8 times 3, and you can just use your product sum puzzles. 8 times 3 is 24. And our sum number, B, goes on the bottom. So we will make a list of factors of 24 in order to find the ones that add to give us 10. So start with always 1 times the number. Don't miss that factor pair because sometimes that's the ones you need. The next factor, 2 times 12. Then we have 3 times 8 and 4 times 6. So from this list, we will start adding together the factors to equal the sum of 10. So 1 plus 24 does not equal 10. 2 plus 12, again, does not equal 10. 3 plus 8 does not work. It is the 4 plus 6. That is the pair that we will need. So once you find the two numbers that are the product of A times C and then the sum of your B number, we're ready to rewrite our trinomial as a polynomial with 4 terms. So we have 8x squared. We're going to replace the 10x with these two terms, 4x and 6x. And then, of course, we just bring down our C value. So here we replace the BX term. Be sure to not forget your variables in that step. So now we are ready to factor by grouping. So we are going to group the first 2 terms together and group the last 2 terms together. When we factor by grouping, we're going to look for the greatest common factor in each group. So 8x squared and 4x. Let's rewrite it so we can do our prime factorization. I like to start with my variable first so it has a common factor of x. When we factor out an x, we're going to subtract our exponents. So there started 2x squared, so we have 2 of them here, and factoring out one of them will leave us 1. So if you need to put a little exponent of 1, you could do that. Here we have a 4x, so if we factor out that variable x, we're going to be left with just a 4. Let's go on and look at our numbers. If we divide by prime numbers, a 2 will go into both 8 and 4. So 2 goes into 8 4 times. Of course, bring down your variable. And 2 goes into 4 2 times. Again, do another prime factorization until you have factored out all the common factors. So 2 goes into 4 2 times. Again, don't forget your variable. And 2 goes into itself 1 time. Also notice all along I've kept my plus sign so that we'll know what to use in our factored form. So these things out front we multiply together. Multiply those together, and those become our GCF out front. So x times 2 times 2 is a 4x, and then our parentheses will be our leftovers, this 2x plus 1. Let's go and do the other group, doing the GCF of that set of terms. So we have 6x plus 3. Let's look for our variable first. Notice we do not have a common factor that's a variable. Because this 3 does not have a variable, it will not have a common factor of a variable. So let's go ahead and look at our numbers. They can both be divided by 3. So 3 goes into 6x 2 times, and of course we want to bring down our variable. 3 goes into itself 1 time, and look, we have our leftovers that match. If this is not happening, stop and go back and look over your work. So we of course need to bring down our greatest common factor that we factored out. That is a positive 3, so make sure you use a plus sign in your work. And of course our leftovers go in our parentheses, so 2x plus 1. To write our answer in factored form, we will make 2 sets of parentheses. One set of parentheses is going to be these parentheses that match the 2x plus 1. The other parentheses is going to be the GCFs that we factored out, so the 4x plus 3. It does not matter the order of your parentheses, so if you end up putting the 4x plus 3 first, and then the ones that match, the 2x plus 1, either answer is correct. You do not have to provide both. This one or this one is the factored form. They're both the same answer. So if we went and multiplied these together using distributive property, we would come up with the same answer that we started with. In order to check those factors, you can just distribute them back together. Let's look at another example, number 2. Here we have 3x squared minus 11x plus 6. So let's start with our A, B, and C and do our product sum. So A is 3, B is negative 11, and C is 6. So we'll take our A times our C, A times C, and that's our product number. The B is going to be your sum number. So we are going to find the product of 3 times 6, that's going to be an 18, and we need a sum of negative 11. So before we start getting into our factors, we'll list all of the factors up to 18. Let's talk about our signs. We need a negative sum. So if this top number is positive, you always look at the bottom number, and both signs will be whatever that bottom number, your sum number, is going to be. So let's make our factors of 18. We of course have 1 times 18. 2 works, it gives us 2 times 9. 3 also works, 3 times 6. So now that we have our factor list of 18, we now know that we'll need to make everything negative, because in order to have a positive product, both signs have to be the same. So in this case, we need everything to be negative so that we can have a negative sum. So when we start adding these together, negative 2 plus negative 9 are the pair of factors that will multiply to give us positive 18 and add to give us a negative 11. So we replace our B term, 3x squared, negative 2x, negative 9x. Replace that bx term with the 2 terms you found that equal your product sum. Once you do that, we do our factor by grouping. So group the first two and last two terms. In the first group, there's a common factor of just an x. The 3 and the 2 are both prime, so you cannot factor out a number. You can only factor out a variable x. So if you're factoring out that variable, you'll have left over a 3x. Of course, bring down your minus sign. If you're factoring out an x from this 2x, we're just going to be left with a 2. If you still need to go over to the side and do your prime factorization, feel free to do that. But we just needed an x there, so also feel like you can go straight to your factored form. Let's talk about this next group. Because the first term is negative, we need to factor out that negative, and we do have a number that we need to factor out. So I will show that prime factorization for this group. So negative 9x and 6. We need to do the prime factors. Because that first term's negative, we're definitely going to factor out a negative 1. If you want to go ahead and factor out the number with that negative sign, feel free to do that. But if we just factor out the negative, that makes the 9x positive and the 6 becomes negative. So now I'm going to do my number, and the prime number would be 3. 3 goes into 9 3 times. Of course, bring down our variable. And 3 goes into negative 6. We have our negative 2. And notice from earlier, our leftovers, 3x minus 2, they do match up. So we multiply together, multiply that we factored out. So our factor would be negative 3, and then do parentheses, your leftovers, 3x minus 2. Because you know those leftovers should match, don't force them to match, because then your factors are still going to be wrong. But that's just a good self-check to know that you're doing it correctly. If you just write down whatever you had here, it's possible that it's wrong. Let's write our final answer in factored form, of course bringing those x minus 3, what we factored out, to one parentheses, and then 3x minus 2 that matches will make our other parentheses. So that is the factored form of this trinomial. Let's move right along and look at example number 3. For this problem, we're going to have 5x squared minus 14x minus 3. So again, we start by naming our a, b, and c and be able to find our product sum. So our a is 5, our c is negative 3, so a times c, 5 times negative 3, that's going to be our product number. Our b is going to be our sum number. So let's go and find our product sum. Product of negative 15, sum of negative 14. So make your factored list. We'll worry about the positive and negative signs here in just a minute. Let's just first make a factor list. So factors of 15. We definitely need to start with 1 times 15. 2 will not work. 15 is not even, so 2 will not work. 3 works. The sum of the digits is divisible by 3. So 1 plus 5 is 6. The sum of the digits is divisible by 3, so that number will be divisible by 3. So 3 times 5 equals 15. 4 will not work. And here's 5, the next one we would try. So those are all of the factors of 15. So now let's consider our signs. With a negative product, we know that we need 1 positive and 1 negative. Look at your sum number. If your sum is negative, that means the bigger number, wherever you want to make a note, the bigger number, or the bigger factor, I should say, the bigger factor needs to go with the negative because the sum is negative. So the bigger factor will go with the negative because our sum is negative. So let's put the negatives on this right-hand side of our factor list. If you've neatly made your factors, your bigger numbers will be on that right-hand side. So now let's add them together. 1 plus negative 15, that's exactly what will work for us. So let's replace those with our bx term. So 5x squared. I'm actually going to pair the negative 15x, since we're going to be doing factor by grouping. You can put those factors in any order you want. So I'm actually going to put the negative 15x with the 5x because it makes sense to me to pair those together. So that means our positive 1x will go with our negative 3. So the order of these two terms, when you find that product sum, the order of those two terms will not matter. So it also works out well when we do our factor by grouping. That first term will not be negative. If you flip them around, it would have, and you would have had to factor out a negative. So I try to avoid that if I can, so that I'm not having to deal with our signs being factoring out a negative. Let's go ahead and do our greatest common factor. So of this group, 5x squared and negative 15x, I always start with my variable first. So I do have a common factor of an x. So that will leave me with a 5x for the first term and just a 15 for the next term. Do another stair step and divide now by a number. A 5 will go into both of those. So it goes into the first term and gives you a 1x, and it goes into the next one as a 3. 5 goes into negative 15, and of course gives you negative 3. Notice our next group. Let's go ahead and write it over here. It says 1x minus 3. So the thing is, my leftovers are already matching what we have as our next group. But we need something to go in that place for the GCF. So in this case, you will need to factor out something. In this case, you will actually factor out a positive 1. If you factor out a 1, that does not change these leftovers. And so they still match. Let's write our answer. We have 5x times our leftovers go inside. Of course, we don't need the 1, so we're just going to write x minus 3. Close that parentheses. You must have something in this place. So we need this plus 1 times, again, we don't need the 1 for that x. It's just x minus 3. So those leftover parentheses match. The other terms that were our GCF come together to make our other factors. So 5x plus 1 and x minus 3 is the factored form. Example number 4. This problem, we have x squared plus 12x minus 28. So start with your product sum. This product will actually be a 1 times negative 28. So 1 times negative 28 will be negative 28. Be careful with your signs always when you're dealing with positive and negatives. So don't forget your sign there. And our sum number is a positive 12. So again, let's not worry about our signs just yet. Let's just list our factors of 28. So factors of 28, we definitely want to start with 1 times 28. 2 will work because that is even. So 2 times 14. 3 does not work. 8 plus 2, the sum of the digits is 10, and 10 is not divisible by 3, so that number will not be divisible by 3. 4 works. 4 times 7. And 5, we will not try because it doesn't end in a 5 or 0. 6, we will not try because if the factors 2 and 3 do not work, then the factor of 6 will not work. And then there's 7, the next one we try. So just go down your factor list until you get all your factors, and then you can start determining your signs. We need a negative 28, so that means our factors need to be 1 positive and 1 negative. So again, look at your sum number. This is going to tell you where your bigger factor should go. So the bigger factor, or the bigger number, will be negative. No, the bigger factor will be positive, because our sum number is positive. So let's leave all these big numbers down this right-hand side. Let's leave them positive. Just tack on negatives on that smaller factor side, and then start adding them together. -1 plus 28, -2 plus 14, -4 plus 7. Add those together until you find the -2 plus 14 is the pair that works. Again, the order of these factors do not matter, so I think I'm going to put that -2, I'm going to put that with the x squared. Don't forget your variable, so -2x plus 14x, and of course then we have our -28. So if I can avoid a negative here for that second group, I try to. Sometimes it's non-avoidable. If both of your factors are negative, then you have to factor out a negative. But in this case, where I have one of each, I can rearrange it so that I don't have to deal with factoring out a negative. Let's look at the first group. I have an x squared and a -2x. So the common factor is just going to be a variable x, and I have the leftovers x minus 2. In our next group, we do not have a variable in common. We have a number, so let's go over here and see what that would be with our prime factorization. We're going to first start with dividing by 2. 2 goes into 14x and gives us 7x. 2 goes into -28 and gives us -14. We can divide by another prime. Look at your leftovers from the previous step. We know we need to get to x minus 2, so let's see what we could do to get there. Sometimes it's easier to work backwards. So if you know you need to get x minus 2, just ask yourself, what would I have to divide by? We can divide by 7. 7 goes into itself and just leaves us with x. 7 divides into -14 and gives you -2. So there our leftovers are matching. So let's write this in factored form now. We have our GCF that comes together. We multiply 2 times 7. That gives us a GCF of a 14. And then our leftovers go in the parentheses, x minus 2. So those leftover parentheses match. They come together and make one factor, so x minus 2. And the GCFs that we factored out make the other parentheses for your factor x plus 14. So that is the correct factored form for this trinomial that we started with. If you, again, distribute this out together, you should check and be able to get back to this trinomial. Example number 5. We have 9x squared minus 12x plus 4. So these next 3 examples, I will move a little bit faster, but feel free to pause the video and try it on your own. So let's start with our A times our C. So A times C, 9 times 4 gives us a product of 36. Our sum number is -12. So we'll list our factors. So factors of 36. 1 times 36, 2 times 18, 3 times 12, 4 times 9, and 6 times 6. So look at your factor list. That sum or that product number is positive. So look at your sum number, and all of your signs will be what the sum number is. If we have a positive product, everything needs this sign. So when we look for our sum of -12, from that factor list of 36, in order to make a -12, we need -6 and -6. So let's replace this middle term with our factors. We have 9x squared minus 6x minus 6x, and then of course we have our c plus 4. So notice in this case, our second group, it's non-avoidable. We have to factor out a negative. It didn't matter the order we wrote those factors, because actually they're the same factors. Let's look at our greatest common factor of each group. So a 9x squared and a negative 6. Let's do our prime factorization. Starting with our variable first, I see that they have an x in common. So 9x minus 6. Then we do another stair step and divide by prime number. So 3 goes into 9x and gives us a 3x. 3 goes into negative 6 and gives us a negative 2. Let's go ahead and get that next group, the negative 6x plus 4, and do the prime factorization for that. I'm going to go ahead and factor out the negative while I'm factoring out my number. So I'm going to go ahead and factor out a negative 2. So when I factor out a negative 2 from this negative 6x, I get a positive 3x. Negative divided by negative is positive. 2 goes into 6 3 times, and of course bring down your variable. Negative 2 divided into 4 is a negative 2. And look there, they match. So we're doing good. So let's take our prime factorization and write our factored answer. We have 3x times 3x minus 2. We have negative 2 times 3x minus 2. We took that GCF and wrote it out front in front of our leftovers. We took this GCF and wrote it out front of this leftover. So notice we bring our parentheses together. 3x minus 2 times 3x minus 2. So really, the best way to write this factored answer is just as one parentheses, 3x minus 2, squared. Squaring means times itself, but that is the best way to write this answer. It's factored in this way because this is actually called a perfect square trinomial. The first term is a perfect square, the last term is a perfect square, and the middle follows a special rule called 2ab. So the first term is a perfect square, the middle term is 2ab, and the last term is a perfect square. So it just makes it special and it factors in this way. Let's look at example number 6. Here we have x squared minus 2x minus 48. We're going to start with our product sum. Keep in mind the a is 1 here. So we do a times c for our product number. We're finding the product of negative 48. It gives us a sum of negative 2. Again, don't worry about your signs until you get your factor list made. So 48. In order to get the factors of 48, obviously start with 1 times that number. 2 works. We'll do 2 times 24, 3 times 16, 4 times 12, and 6 times 8. Make sure you're listing your full factor list because the pair you need might be the one that you left off. So when we need a negative product, we need 1 positive and 1 negative. So we look at our sum number to know where our bigger factor will have positive or negative sign. So this tells us where our bigger factor will have a negative. Tack on those negatives down that right-hand column. If you've made a nice, neat factor list, your larger number will be on this right-hand side. So when we add those together, we're finding that 6 plus negative 8, 6 plus negative 8 gives us a sum of negative 2. So they multiply to give us negative 48, and they add to give us negative 2. I'll go ahead and leave that negative 8, plus 6x minus 8x minus 48. Went ahead and left the negative 8 on the right hand side. If you want to flip it around so you don't have to deal with the negative, you can. But I want to go ahead and make sure I show that again. Let's do our factor by grouping. Group the first two and last two terms. This first group, hopefully you're getting in the habit, if it's just a variable, you can go ahead and factor that out and name the leftovers. But if you still need to go off to the side and do your prime factorization, please do that. This next group, let's go ahead and show that prime factorization. So we got negative 8x minus 48. We're going to do our prime factorization. Because that first term of the group is negative, we want to make sure we factor out that negative. So that's going to change the signs of both terms, which works out well because look at your leftovers from the previous step. We have a positive x and a positive 6 that we're trying to get to anyways, so that changes those signs to get the right signs of our leftover parentheses. So let's go ahead and do our prime numbers. We can divide by 2, goes into 8 4 times, of course bring down our variable. 2 goes into 48 24 times. Do another prime factorization, again dividing by 2. 2 goes into 4x, we get a 2x. 2 goes into 24, we get a 12. And another prime factor of 2, so we get x plus 6, which is checking out with what we had in the previous step. So multiply all these together to get our multiply all those together to get our GCF. So 2 times 2 times 2 times a negative 1. Make sure you're multiplying, not adding. That will give us a negative 8. Of course, the x plus 6 goes in that leftovers parentheses. For our last step, we write our factors x plus 6 times x minus 8. Always remembering the order of those do not matter. So if you've written x minus 8 and then x plus 6, that is perfectly fine. One last example, number 7. Here we are going to have 6x squared plus 17x plus 12. Feel free to pause the video and try this one on your own. Alright, so let's check your work. We did product sum, 6 times 12 for our product number, and sum of 17 from the list of 72. This is why it's always important to get your entire list, because in this case it was the last pair of factors that we need, 8 and 9. Because our product is positive, our sum is positive, both numbers will stay positive, whatever this sum number would be. So replace the middle term with the two factors you found. Do factor by grouping. Factor out that GCF of the first group, and we have our leftovers parentheses. Factor out the GCF of the second group, and we have the leftover parentheses. So here is that GCF work. Being very careful that everything is organized. This was our first group, so we brought it back over here and put it in that first place of our work. This was our second group, so we brought it back over and carefully put it in our second place of our group. So our final step is writing our factored form, the two sets of parentheses.